My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
Hey, Jessica Marshall here with another episode of the Eagle, a Times Union podcast. It is prime time for tulips here in upstate New York. That's one of my absolute favorite times of year. I highly recommend that you go down to Washington Park in Albany if you can and check out their blooms. But there are blooms everywhere, so if you can't get to Albany, that's okay. Also, you can check out some amazing photos and video of the tulip blooms on timesunion.com and on our social channels. Also, speaking of spring things, we have a budget. Finally! Governor Kathy Hochul and legislative leaders struck a deal Monday on a $254 billion budget. It's nearly a month late, but here we are. I'm going to throw now to Capitol Confidential's Dan Clark, who sat down with Times Union Capitol Bureau reporter Raga Justin this week after Hochul announced the budget agreement.
Hi, Raga.
Hello, good morning.
So we kind of have a budget deal and we don't know the details, but what I'm interested is looking at what we do after the budget. And I don't know if lawmakers necessarily have their own agendas for that just yet. There are a few things that I'm watching. This week, medical aid in dying passed the Assembly. Mm-hmm. We don't know if it's going to pass the Senate. And I know that you spoke to the Senate sponsor, Brad Hoylman-Siegel, yesterday for a second about it. What did he say?
I think he was expressing confidence, as you always do when you're a sponsor of one of these kind of high-profile pieces of legislation. He said, I'm confident that we'll be able to bring it to the floor. I'm confident that because the Assembly, took this sort of historic step with this bill, that the Senate is not far behind. Whether that's actually the case, though, I think is up for debate. As you know, we heard the Senate Majority Leader talk about it yesterday, and I don't know if what you got from that was confidence, but to me it read as, I might not have the votes. I might not be able to pass this.
Yeah, no, I read it the exact same way. It was almost like her saying, I'm not going to bring it to the floor if it doesn't have the votes, and also we're going to have a conversation about it. And whenever they say we're going to have a conversation about it, that makes me think okay, so this isn't settled there.
Right.
They have work to do if they actually want to pass this.
100%. And maybe they are having conversations about it.
Right.
Because I would imagine the Assembly, taking that step must have prompted some sort of soul searching within the chamber. Don't you think? I mean, The Senate probably was discussing this, and I don't know that all of them are on board with something this sort of massive and major. I don't know.
I don't know either. And in the Assembly, I get the sense that things changed because new members were elected. Like when Amy Pollin was talking about it yesterday, the Assembly sponsor, she kind of said, well, some members left, some members came in, and she said that she lobbied the new members and said, hey, you're new here. This bill has been here for a while. Let me tell you why we should pass it. And then it made it to the floor. In the Senate, there aren't a ton of new members this year. It's 2025. So in 2024, I think we had 2 or 3 new Democrats elected. C.L. Albino, Christopher Ryan, and I'm forgetting whoever else was elected. Sorry for that. So I don't know. That's one of those things. The other one that I'm really looking at this year is the Grieving Families Act. It is that bill that would allow grief and anguish to be eligible when you do a wrongful death lawsuit. And it has not done well, I should say. It's actually passed both chambers unanimously, so it actually has done very well. But then once it makes it to the governor's desk, it's been vetoed. And for whatever reason, the legislature has decided not to override that veto any of the years, despite it, again, passing unanimously in both chambers. So I'm curious if they give it another try, and I just don't know.
I don't know either. I wonder at what point you look at it and you say, we've done all we can. Well, we haven't done all we can, but we've done all we're prepared to do.
Right.
And at the end of the day, it's up to her. That's an interesting bill because the debate on it is so... it's just a very divisive, I think, concept, because you've got people who are saying it just like the medical aid in dying, it's an issue of compassion. And you've got other people saying, no, it's an issue of practicality. The consequences of this could be greater than we're prepared to admit. With the Grieving Families Act, I think the damages could exceed like thousands, millions of dollars more than the state theoretically could handle. And, there's all this talk about insurance premiums going up and everything. And I don't know that Hochul is really, she might be reading the tea leaves on that and being like, I don't know that that's the best thing to do for the state. And she's been very consistent about that.
And I don't think that her position will change in the sense that the main people who have lobbied against this are municipalities in terms of New York City hates this, localities hate this, because suddenly they would be on the hook for a lot of money in a wrongful death lawsuit. Same thing with hospitals, which is a little concerning because I hope there aren't any wrongful deaths in hospitals, but I get where they're coming from. So from her perspective, I see it as this is a fiscal issue in her mind,
right?
Where she can't bankrupt local governments.
Right.
Even though that may not happen. We just don't know.
And you've got other Democrats saying, well, in the absence of actual, evidence that this would bankrupt local governments, this is a moral issue. And you're sort of taking the less moral approach.
Right. That's one of those bills that is very much wait and see, because they introduced it, they reintroduced it in February, I think, and the language is not significantly different or at all different from last year's version. So I have to assume if they're going to pass it again, they're going to amend it or just pass it with the expectation that she's going to veto it again.
Right.
So we will see. That's usually an end of session bill. So TBD on that. Another bill that I'm looking at is, and I don't have the title in front of me, and I always get it wrong, but it's the Packaging and Manufacturing Reduction Act. I don't know what it's called, but it's called Extended Producer Responsibility, where the people who make the packaging or that force us to accept the packaging, I should say, would then be responsible in some way of making sure that it's recycled or disposed of properly. You would get less cardboard in your Amazon box or less plastic packaging. I hate plastic packaging.
Me too.
I need scissors to open it up. First off,
despise it.
Yeah. Why? Some of this stuff, some of the adhesives that they use on this stuff, I swear you could repair the International Space Station with, because I'll get it and I'll open it up and I will be trying to rip it apart.
No, 100%. It's military grade plastic.
Yeah. And then I have to go grab a chainsaw or something to get it apart.
You're casual. You've got a chainsaw just lying around in your deck.
Yeah. Well, yes. So if they don't pass this bill, that's an idea for them. Please help me.
Dan is now in the business of advising the legislature which bills to pass.
I just, and if I can't pull it apart, somebody who has issues with their hands, forget about it.
Done.
You might as well just send it back.
Done. I'm a frequent purchaser off of eBay, and sometimes the sellers that I'm buying from send me things wrapped in old scarves, little Debbie's boxes that are just being reused. Once I got it, just kind of a tiny little Ziploc baggie. I'm usually ordering little trinkets or books or something. So I don't know. There are creative ways to package your materials, and I feel like that's a lesson that some of these manufacturers need to learn.
I'd love to receive a scarf along with my package.
That was a crazy one.
Delightful. So there's that bill. And the interesting thing about that is that bill has gained a lot of support in the past year. But there's like a competing bill now that is a little bit, it puts the onus a little bit less on industry to invest in local recycling infrastructure. So I think there's like a battle between the bills right now. The Business Council is very involved in this legislation. So
as they so often are.
No, exactly. Like they're looking at everything. They have a stake in everything. So that's that. What's on your mind for end of session? Anything that you got?
I'm trying to think conceptually here because I'm not as good with you or as good as you with the specific bills. Medical aid and dying, obviously. I'd be so interested to see if that goes through the Senate.
Oh, well, something actually that you've covered this year, and me too, is CDPAP.
Oh,
I'm not even going to explain what it is, because if you don't know what it is, just go online and read our coverage. It's so much to explain.
Type in Dan Clark and Times Union and CDPAP,
yes,
and there's a treasure trove. Yeah, I think CDPAP, I've heard some kind of rumors floating out there that, because essentially the state has kicked this very important deadline for the kind of transition of this very popular home care program. They've kicked it down the road to June, I believe.
Yeah.
That is like session time in the meantime. If you're actually seriously interested in fixing this, as the legislature has said they are, then you've got time to do something about it, right? I mean, Senator Gustavo Rivera is very vocal about this. He thinks that there's a lot of tweaks that can be done, through the legislature, as opposed to the budget, which this was a budget change from last year that we're sort of dealing with the ramifications of now. Yeah, I don't know if you heard anything about whether they'll take it up.
No, and that's the thing. It's complicated for them, I think, because they have to first admit that they did this last year. So they set this into motion.
Yeah.
And the things that are happening now with the aides not getting paid, people losing their home care, it did not come out of nowhere. I mean, take it from me, the person who has written about this for like the past year. They were talking about this last July and have been talking about it since then, every single time that they can. So when it got to this point, nobody can be surprised. And I'm curious if they are going to actually do something, or if they're going to try to pressure maybe the Department of Health to clean up the mess. I don't know. But I do know it looks like the Department of Health is starting to shift the blame onto Public Partnerships, the company, which I think we all saw coming. And I don't know how that ends, because they have a very lucrative contract with them. And I would assume that they don't want to break that contract.
I don't see a future where they're breaking that contract. I see a future where what you're saying exactly is that they just continue to shift blame. PPL continues to do the work or not do the work. And everyone just sort of chugs along. And the people who suffer at the end of the day are the consumers, the patients who are enrolled in this program, and the people who aren't getting paid. So
that's right. Speaking of chugging along, do you have an opinion on high-speed rail, Raga?
I don't have an opinion on high-speed rail, Dan. I wish I did, because it's theoretically something I'm interested in. I do love Amtrak. Hearing not great things about Amtrak, though, some of the service improvements that they're making, right? It's kind of slowing down some of the service.
Yeah, I don't know. Between Albany and New York City.
Between Albany and New York City, yeah, which is like, where else are you going?
Yeah.
From Albany.
Boston, Buffalo, Canada.
Okay.
This segment was originally part of a recent episode of our sister podcast, Capital Confidential. You can hear more of that episode, which contains a conversation about the potential for high-speed rail in New York, wherever you get your podcasts. And to read more about the new budget deal and more State House news, check out the New York section on timesunion.com and subscribe to our Capital Confidential newsletter. Let's take a short break. When we come back, forget resurrecting dire wolves. If we're going to bring back extinct creatures of the past, what about 8-foot-tall beavers, mastodons, or ducks that wear tuxedos?
Why is healthcare so expensive? What's happening with climate change? And are elections safe? You can find answers to those questions and a lot more with Capital Confidential from me, Dan Clark. I give you the latest news and analysis from the state capitol and beyond. Sign up now at capitalconfidential.com. That's capital with an O, confidential.com.
12-year-old Jaliek Rainwalker vanished without a trace from a small upstate New York village on a cool November night in 2007. His adoptive parents say he ran away. Police believe he was murdered, but a body has never been found, and a suspect has never been named.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah,
Appreciate
okay,
that.
all right, but you don't want to talk.
Then when I learned they were trying to undo the adoption, that's when I learned that this story was very complicated, well, a lot more complicated than I even thought.
Almost 2 decades later, the case remains unsolved. I'm Jessica Marshall.
And I'm Wendy Libertor.
In this podcast from the Times-Union, we take a deep dive into the mystery of this missing child and try to find some answers.
So have you come to terms that Jaliek is probably dead?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I feel that he was killed on November 1st, 2007.
Available now, wherever you listen to podcasts.
If you're enjoying this podcast, take advantage of all the Times-Union has to offer and support our efforts to bringing you award-winning journalism by becoming a Times-Union subscriber today. Go to timesunion.com/subscribe.
And we're back. You're listening to The Eagle, a Times-Union podcast. I'm Jessica Marshall. A company called Colossal Biosciences is now claiming that they've brought back the direwolf. They went extinct 13,000 years ago, but they were resurrected, fictionally at least, in recent years thanks to George R.R. Martin and the success of his Game of Thrones series. But now we're talking about bringing back these creatures on Jurassic Park-level proportions. While direwolves aren't native to upstate New York, the whole thing got us thinking, what extinct creatures would we bring back if we could that roamed upstate New York thousands of years ago? Times-Union reporter H. Rose Schneider looked into this week and joins me now on The Eagle. I want to talk about your story about unique extinct animals that were kind of native to upstate New York, but it all started really with the story about the direwolves. They basically, this private company basically Jurassic Parked or said they Jurassic Parked a direwolf.
There's a lot of people who say, well, they're not actually direwolves. But what happened is that they took DNA of a gray wolf and genetically modified it to have traits similar to that of a direwolf. And in kind of a very similar vein to Jurassic Park, they published what's not actually a study, but a preprint, because it does not have it's not peer reviewed. But in this publication, they talk about how they took fossilized bone and tooth and drilled into it and isolated the sort of genetic makeup, and then tweaked gray wolf DNA, and then put that into a domestic dog who gave birth to these 3 wolf pups.
Our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
There are obviously a lot of ethical implications of doing things like this, bringing back extinct species. You know, there's Jurassic Park. There's Dr. Ian Malcolm, played by Jeff Goldblum, who had a very sort of sobering take on bringing back dinosaurs. But before we get to the sort of reasons why we're not bringing back extinct species willy-nilly, maybe, is that it got us thinking, right? It got you thinking as you were writing about this, that you know, there were some extinct species that are very specific to upstate New York, direwolves not being one of them, but that are worth talking about. Some really interesting species that used to roam the the landscapes here. So which ones did you kind of rediscover, I should say?
It's started, with a conversation about what would you want to bring back, and it sort of led into looking this up and also talking to the New York State Museum. And there are some really interesting ones.
Let's start with the one that's in the title of your piece.
Of course.
The 8-foot-tall beaver?
Yeah, so the giant beaver, yeah. So the giant beaver that was 8 foot tall, I believe does not actually have a paddle, has a more rounded tail, because I don't think that they were really equipped to build dams at the size that they were. But yes, they roamed New York State. I think this was about 14,500 years ago. The 10-foot tall Jefferson's ground sloth.
Wow.
So not a sloth in a tree, but a massive bear-sized sloth. It's they have their, those kind of sharp claws that they have at the front, which seems so much more innocent on a tiny little sloth. They come off a little bit more intimidating.
When you talk about seeing images of these creatures, obviously there wasn't photography or really humankind as we know it back then, 14,000 years ago, but they're based on kind of like fossilized versions, right? Like renderings of fossilized versions.
Fossilized remains, models, illustrations.
Of course, they're all on our website if you want to see these images.
So there's the Jefferson's ground sloth, the giant beaver. Obviously, we have the mastodon, because we have the Cohoes mastodon, whose remains grace our New York State Museum. And there's the stag moose, which was a kind of deer that was, I think, slightly larger than a moose.
Oh, wow.
It was kind of similar to another kind of species of megafauna, the Irish elk. And that was all 14,500 years ago. We also have mammoths, which are distinct from mastodons, muskoxen, and caribou that were there around 25,000 years ago, when on this sort of edge of the Laurentide ice sheet, which covered almost all of New York except for Long Island and the Allegheny Highlands.
What about the Labrador duck? That one stood out to me.
Yeah, so that didn't even come up, I think, in the conversation with the State Museum, and I felt like it felt a little bit forgotten about. And I think that's partly because it's a more recently extinct species. This is not, a prehistoric creature. It's not something big and dramatic like a giant beaver or a mastodon. This is a species of duck that was last seen in 1878 in Elmira, New York. It was reportedly shot, killed, and eaten. The very last one. I don't know. It appealed to me. Because it has the males have this black and white coat with kind of this black collar. So it's sort of this tuxedoed duck.
I love animals that look like they're wearing tuxedos.
Yes.
There's also the passenger pigeon, right? What about that one?
So the passenger pigeon was once, I think, widespread across North America. Then there became a commercial market for the passenger pigeon, and it went extinct in 1914 when Martha, the last passenger pigeon, died in captivity at the Cincinnati Zoo. So this was a bird not just native to New York, but like throughout the United States. What's interesting is there is some efforts to bring this bird back. There's a nonprofit that, similar to Colossal Biosciences, has this goal of using genetic tweaks to its closest living relative, the North American band-tailed pigeon, thereby sort of similar to our attempt to bring back the direwolves, bringing back the passenger pigeon.
Now, there's kind of because I want to jump into the ethical implications of this right now. There's kind of a huge difference between bringing back something like the passenger pigeon, which, as you said, only went extinct maybe like little over 100 years ago, 110 years ago, versus bringing back, the 8-foot beaver or, the giant sloth or, the dire wolf. These animals were alive thousands of years ago when the earth was a very different place, right?
There's really not an environment for these animals at this point time.
They would be a novelty, like in the zoo, right?
Yeah. And even these 3 dire wolves are, being kept somewhere in captivity. They're not being released to kind of run in droves across like the wilds of North America. They're kept in captivity, and that's where they will live out their lives. There's certainly an ethical concern for that. There's even an ethical concern as far as trying to have, when it comes to the conversation about bringing back more recently extinct species, because of whether it's kind of moving the conversation away from, keeping the species alive and keeping its environment in place versus like saying, oh, once it's extinct, we can just bring it back.
Well, you've all seen Jurassic Park. We know how that ends.
Exactly.
There's lots of ethical and moral concerns, obviously, and physical concerns too. Like how do you actually do it? Regardless, just imagine for a minute that there weren't any practical concerns or anything holding us back from bringing back extinct species. We have launched a poll on timesunion.com that asks our readers if you could pick one to bring back and, see you walking down the street or whatever, which one would that be? And I'm going to pose that question to you. Do you have a preference for the particular creature that used to roam upstate New York that you talk about in the article that you would like to see in real life?
I actually voted in the poll, and my pick was the Labrador Duck because I like a well-dressed animal. And also I just felt, I don't know, it felt like this was sort of our dark horse candidate here.
If you could choose to bring back one of the extinct species that we just talked about in this segment, which one would it be? We got a poll going over at timesunion.com. Head over there and vote for your favorite. Right now, the passenger pigeon is leading in popularity, followed by the mastodon and the Labrador duck. That's it for this week. We'll be back next week with more from inside the newsroom. The Eagle is a production of the Times-Union. It's produced and edited by myself, Jessica Marshall, with help from Erica Smith and the Times-Union digital team. Our music is Flyin' by Top Floor. Special thanks to Dan Clark, Raga Justin, and H. Rose Schneider for their contributions to this episode. Got questions or comments about the Eagle or any of our podcasts here at the Times-Union? Email us at podcast@timesunion.com.